Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into something today that I think we can all relate to at least a little bit of traction.
Oh, yeah, definitely a universal topic.
It is, and we found a really interesting Reddit thread from Ask Men Advice.
Okay.
And in this thread, a user posted that he finds like 90% of women his age attractive.
Wow.
And he's wondering if that's like normal.
Okay.
So we're going to unpack that a little bit today and see what people had to say.
Yeah, should be interesting.
Yeah, and this thread, it's fascinating to see the different responses.
Hmm.
Right out of the gate, a lot of the men on the thread were basically like, yep, sounds about right. Welcome to being a man. So what do you think is going on there? Why that immediate validation from other men?
Well, I think there are a few things at play. I mean, first, you have to consider just the biological differences between men and women. Men, on average, they tend to have a higher baseline level of sexual desire. Part of that's hormones, testosterone, but it's also the societal expectations and norms around masculinity.
So it's not all nature. There's some nurture sprinkled in there, too.
Exactly. Think about it. Boys from a young age are often exposed to messages that emphasize the importance of a woman's looks. It's in the media, it's in our culture, and that can create a feedback loop where men are basically conditioned to be more visually driven.
Hmm. And a few people in the thread brought up evolutionary biology, too, like how a woman's body shape can be a big factor in attraction for a man. Can you break that down a little? What's the evolutionary reason behind that?
Sure. So, from an evolutionary perspective, there are certain physical attributes in women that have historically been associated with fertility and, reproductive potential. Like, for example, wider hips, a certain waist to hip ratio. And men might be subconsciously drawn to those features because they were associated with successful reproduction throughout human history.
It's interesting how those primal instincts are still kind of influencing us today.
Oh, absolutely. Our brains are still catching up to modern life where we have contraception and family planning. But those ancient instincts, they're still there, influencing our subconscious responses.
So going back to the original post for a sec,
Hmm.
the guy actually wondered if maybe this was just a phase.
Yeah.
He used the term horny MF phase because he hadn't been dating much lately.
Right.
And other commenters agreed, saying that being out of the scene for a while could definitely amplify those feelings of attraction. Do you think there's any truth to that? Does context actually play a role in how we perceive attractiveness?
Context is huge. I mean, if you've been out of the dating game for a while, it makes sense that your brain might become more sensitive to those initial attraction triggers. It's like your senses are heightened because they haven't been stimulated recently.
So it's not necessarily that you're more attracted to everyone, it's just that you're more aware of those feelings.
Right. It's like they're more noticeable because they haven't been channeled or fulfilled. And this actually brings up a really important point that attraction isn't static, it's fluid. Our feelings can change and be influenced by so many different things. Our recent experiences, our emotional state.
Right. It's not just set in stone.
Mm.
Okay, so now some people in the thread, they kind of push back a bit on this whole idea of being attracted to almost everyone. They said, okay, well, while that initial attraction might be mostly physical, it's personality, intelligence, compatibility that really matter in the long run.
Yeah.
So how do all of these factors like weave together?
Yeah, you might feel super attracted to someone initially, but if you don't connect on an intellectual or emotional level, if your values don't align, that spark's gonna fizzle out. It's like building a fire. You need kindling to get it started, but you need logs to keep it burning.
I like that analogy. The initial attraction is the spark, but those deeper qualities are what fuel the fire.
Exactly. And as time goes on, those deeper qualities, shared interests, mutual respect, a sense of humor, those become even more important.
Okay, this thread had some really interesting twists and turns. One commenter mentioned this concept of deployment goggles.
Deployment goggles.
Yeah. He was drawing on his military experience, saying that being away for long periods of time can really skew your perception of attractiveness. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a well-known psychological phenomenon. Absence can make the heart grow fonder, and it can also make someone seem more attractive.
So it's not just limited to the military.
Yeah,
We might experience this in our everyday lives, too.
absolutely. I mean, think about how people tend to idealize an ex after a breakup, or how someone might seem more attractive when you haven't seen them in a while. Distance can create this sort of halo effect where you focus on the positive and kind of downplay the negative.
So, like, we fill in the gaps with our own fantasies and projections.
Yeah. And that can be fun for a while, but it's important to remember that in the real world, you're interacting with a whole person, flaws and all.
Right, fantasies don't really hold up in long-term relationships. Okay, here's another comment that I found interesting. Someone suggested that maybe this guy just lives in an area with a higher concentration of attractive people.
Hmm.
And that kind of sparked a debate about how societal standards and regional differences play into attraction. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's definitely true that beauty standards vary widely across cultures,
Hmm.
even within different regions of the same country. What's considered attractive in one place might not be in another. Our surroundings definitely shape our perceptions of beauty.
So where you live could actually influence how many people you find attractive.
Yeah, potentially. Think about it. If you're constantly surrounded by images and people who fit a certain beauty standard, you're more likely to internalize that standard and find people who align with it more attractive, especially in the age of social media where we're bombarded with these idealized images of beauty.
It makes you wonder then, are we attracted to what we find inherently beautiful, or is it more about what we've been conditioned to find beautiful?
That is the million-dollar question, right? Philosophers and psychologists have been debating that for centuries. I think it's probably a mix of both nature and nurture. We have certain biological predispositions, but those are shaped and molded by our experiences and the cultural context we live in.
I think this is a great point to take a little break and let everything sink in.
Hmm.
Before we go to part 2, though, I wanted to remind everyone listening, if you're digging this deep dive, please consider liking this episode and subscribing to Voices of the Soul for more thought-provoking discussions.
And you can always explore these topics further on Shauna's YouTube channel. It's called Shauna Pelage. She's got some fantastic videos that really delve into the complexities of human behavior and relationships.
We'll be back in just a moment to continue this conversation, so stick around.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how cultural norms and personal experiences can shape our perceptions of beauty.
Yeah.
Let's dig a little deeper into that personal experience piece.
I'm really curious about that. Like, do our past relationships subconsciously influence who we find attractive?
It really makes you think, right? How much of our type is actually hardwired and how much is learned?
Right, exactly.
Our brains are wired for survival and reproduction, so it makes sense that we're naturally drawn to people who display traits that have historically signaled good health and the ability to care for offspring.
Okay, so those primal instincts are the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
But then our own individual experiences sort of build on top of that.
Exactly. Let's say, for example, you had a really great first love,
Okay.
and that person had a particular eye color, or maybe a certain laugh that you really loved.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your brain might start associating those features with positive emotions.
Interesting.
And then later on, you might find yourself subconsciously drawn to those same features in other people, even if you don't consciously realize the connection.
So it's not even about the feature itself. It's about the feelings and memories we associate with it.
Right, it's subconscious. It's a link that our brain makes without us even knowing. And the same thing can happen with negative experiences too. Like imagine you have a really bad breakup with someone who has a certain personality trait.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Well, you might start to unconsciously avoid people who display that same trait in the future.
Wow, so our brains are like constantly taking notes and shaping our preferences without us even realizing it.
Pretty much, yeah. And this isn't just limited to romantic relationships either. The people we're drawn to as friends, as mentors, even as colleagues can be influenced by this complex interplay of biology and personal history.
This is making me rethink my whole concept of having a type. Like maybe it's not really about a fixed set of features, but more about the underlying qualities and associations those features represent for us, on a subconscious level, of course.
I think that's a really insightful way to look at it. It's not just about checking boxes on a list. It's more about an emotional resonance,
Yeah.
a sense of familiarity and comfort, even if we can't quite articulate why we feel it.
Right. And that would also explain why our type can change over time as we have new experiences and meet new people.
Exactly. Our associations evolve as we do.
Okay, so what about those times when you just feel inexplicably drawn to someone? Like you can't really put your finger on it. There's just this instant chemistry. Have you ever felt that?
Oh, absolutely. That instant spark, that magnetic pull. It's definitely a real thing.
It's like there's a certain magic to it.
There is. And I think embracing that mystery is part of what makes attraction so fascinating. We can try to understand it from a scientific and psychological perspective, but at the end of the day, there's always going to be that element of the unknown.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about feeling attracted to someone, but that doesn't always mean you want to pursue a relationship with them.
Right.
How do we navigate that space where you acknowledge someone's attractiveness without feeling like you have to act on it?
That's a really important distinction to make. Attraction can be like a spark. It catches your eye, it piques your interest. But a relationship needs more than just a spark to thrive. It needs fuel, it needs tending, and most importantly, it needs compatibility on multiple levels.
So how do you know if that spark is worth pursuing? How do you know if it's more than just fleeting attraction?
That's a tough question. And honestly, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But I think it often boils down to a combination of factors. Do you feel a genuine connection with this person?
Okay.
Beyond just the physical, do you share common interests and values? Do you genuinely enjoy spending time with them and getting to know them on a deeper level?
So it's about more than just checking off boxes on a list. It's about a feeling, a gut instinct that tells you there's something more there.
Exactly. And that intuition is informed by all of our past experiences, our values, our hopes for the future. It's a pretty complex algorithm that our subconscious is running.
I'm realizing now that attraction really is such a multifaceted experience. It's biological, it's emotional, it's influenced by everything from our personal history to our cultural surroundings. Heck, even things like where we live and what we see in the media can play a role.
Absolutely. And the more we understand the nuances of attraction, the better equipped we are to navigate it in a way that feels authentic and fulfilling for us as individuals.
Well said. This conversation has been so insightful. And speaking of insight, I want to remind our listeners that we really rely on your support to keep these conversations going. So if you're enjoying this deep dive into attraction, please consider subscribing to Voices of the Soul and sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it too.
And if you're looking for even more thought-provoking content on relationships, psychology, and personal growth, be sure to check out Shauna's YouTube channel. It's called Shauna Pelage, and you'll find a ton of great information there.
We'll be right back for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some practical tips for navigating attraction in a healthy and empowering way. So don't go anywhere. And we are back for the final part of our deep dive into attraction. We've been talking about the science, the psychology, the cultural influences, all this stuff.
Yeah, it's complicated.
It really is.
Yeah.
So for this last part, I want to get practical.
Yeah.
What are some tips for navigating attraction in a healthy and empowering way?
Okay, so I think one of the most important things is self-awareness. Like, pay attention to your own patterns of attraction.
Right.
What qualities are you consistently drawn to? What are the underlying values or needs that those qualities might represent for you?
So it's like taking inventory of your own attraction style.
Exactly. And once you have a better understanding of your patterns, you can start making more conscious choices. Like, let's say you notice you're often drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable.
Uh-huh.
Well, you can start to examine why that is. Is it a pattern from your past? Are you subconsciously seeking out familiar dynamics?
So it's about recognizing those potential red flags and breaking free from those cycles that aren't really serving us.
Yes. And this kind of leads into another tip. Don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone a little.
Well, I like that.
If you always find yourself attracted to the same type of person and it's not leading to the kind of relationships you want, well, maybe it's time to try something different.
Branch out, explore different personalities' interests. You never know who you might connect with.
Exactly. Sometimes what we think is our type is actually just a narrow view of what's possible.
Okay, so here's a situation I think a lot of people have encountered. What about when you're attracted to someone, but it's just not appropriate to act on those feelings? Like maybe it's a coworker or a friend's partner?
Right. Or someone who's just not interested.
Exactly. How do you deal with that?
Well, the key here is to acknowledge the attraction without dwelling on it. It's like noticing a beautiful sunset. You can appreciate it without feeling the need to possess it.
Ooh, I like that. It's about recognizing the feeling but not letting it control you.
Right. And in those situations, often simply recognizing that the attraction is either not reciprocated or that acting on it would have negative consequences, while that can be enough to help it fade naturally.
It's about being responsible with your feelings, I guess.
Exactly. Prioritizing your own well-being and respecting the well-being of others. And if you're really struggling to let go, talking to a therapist or a counselor can be incredibly helpful. They can give you the tools to process those complex emotions.
Such good advice. Sometimes we all need a little help with that.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's important to remember that attraction, it's just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to building meaningful relationships.
Yeah. Compatibility, shared values, mutual respect, emotional intelligence, all of those things are so important for creating something that lasts.
Couldn't agree more. And ultimately, I think the most important thing is to approach attraction with a sense of curiosity, to be open to learning and growing, and to trust that the right connections will find you in their own time.
I love that. This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about attraction today. from the biology to the psychology to just the practicalities of navigating it all in a healthy way.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, for another episode of Voices of the Soul. Your support really means a lot to us.
And if you enjoyed this step dive, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. We love having these thought-provoking conversations, and we're so glad you're here with us.
And don't forget to check out Shauna's YouTube channel, Shauna Palage, for even more amazing content on relationships, personal growth, and so much more. Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep those voices of the soul shining bright.